At twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, o'er the ramparts we watched was so gallantly streaming, and the rockets like glass above bursting in air gave peace through the night, that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet, o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Order! Hold!
Our speaker this morning is our city historian, Lieutenant Colonel Robert von Hausland. Prior to retiring from the military, he proposed and helped create a civil-military assistance team to assist civilian first responders in analyzing and dealing with chemical, biological, and radiological attacks and coordinating civil and military responses. The unit, stationed in Scotia, New York, became operational only weeks before the 9/11 attack and was one of the first military units to reach ground zero. It was the prototype for approximately 40 other such units around the nation today.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning. Please excuse me if I'm a little tired and hoarse this morning. I spent all of last night trying to write the most perfect speech of my life. I felt the occasion required it. About a half an hour before I arrived here this morning, I finished, and I probably threw it out. Because there's nothing I can say that will be more moving than the things you will hear today in the papers and on the television and the radio. There's nothing more touching than the ceremonies, centuries old, which we are about to observe. So, it left me with the thought, what can I bring to you as a fellow Amsterdamian, a former resident of Washington, D.C. and New York City, someone who had worked at the Pentagon and the World Trade Center, someone who was trained in counterterrorism, but also in history. I can't give you a historical perspective on 9/11 yet. It's too soon. It'll take a generation or two. But looking back into history, I can draw some threads together from other events and perhaps give us some insight as to what we should think and what we should do today. The first point is that the war is not over. We've captured bin Laden, the other co-conspirators have been jailed, but this war will go on for some time. Will we be attacked again? Probably. Why? Because we have to remain vigilant every day and in all locations. Our enemies only have to find a way to get through once. And although we think of terrorism as something relatively new in our history, it's not. It dates back to biblical times. It's always been with us. It is the last resort of the weak party. And it will continue to be until there are no more sources for producing recruits. Is it possible that we will have to face, here in Amsterdam, these situation someday. Yes, it is. And that's not a pleasant thought, especially after all we've been through lately. But I would like to ask you to think of two things. One, Flight 11, which crashed into the North Tower, passed over our heads here in Amsterdam as it lined up on the North Tower at 8:26, when we'll observe our moment of silence in a few moments. That's almost exactly the same flying distance as the plane in Pennsylvania was from the Capitol when it was driven into the ground. One of the reasons Flight 93 passengers knew that they had to take action is they were delayed on the ground, and the reports had already started to come in about Flight 11 and Flight 77, and everyone realized what was going on at that point. What if it had been Flight 11 that had been delayed, and another flight had taken off on time? Could that have been here? Yes, it could have been. Could it be here because of accident? You'll notice that terrorists always change their tactics. There will probably never be another 9/11 style attack where airliners are driven into buildings. There's a couple of good reasons for that, not all those things you see with TSA at the airport. The hardened cockpit doors and the fact that everybody now knows that to open that door for any reason is probably death for everyone on the airplane and on the ground, that tactic is no longer going to be used. And in fact, the shoe bomber afterwards was an attempt to blow up the plane in the air, not to take it over and turn it into a weapon. If something like that was to occur again, with the skill that the shoe bomb was put together, which never lit, but perhaps on a Conex container, of which thousands come in today, and maybe one destined for New York, or Buffalo, or Chicago, with that kind of precision in building bombs, maybe it goes off somewhere else. And finally, when we think about these things, and we should, remember that terrorists pick targets for two reasons. One, the value of the payoff of the target, how symbolically high, how much casualties can be caused. And in 9/11, look what they chose. It's the chief center of our financial strength, the chief center of our military strength, and probably the chief center, the capital of our political strength. Had they had more weapons, more airplanes, they might have picked other things that represented our influence over them. Perhaps Hollywood, perhaps the Sears Tower in Chicago. We'll never know. But it was also picked to send a message to their own people. Look what we can do to the Americans. As much as it was a message to us, look what we can do to you. In the future, as their tactics change, they may seek to randomize their targets, to convince us that anywhere in the United States is unsafe, because I know we all think New York, Los Angeles, Washington, never here, but it might be. So it's up to all of us to be ready and prepared. Now, one thing that I never hear anyone talk about that I think is particularly significant is if you look at it from a historical viewpoint, terror never wins. Not in the modern day society. There have been, even in wartime, there have been attempts. If you look, for example, at the Germans firing V-2 rockets into London in 1944, that was as horrific as anything going on in Baghdad today. You walk down the street, and any building at any time can explode right in front of you, with no warning, with no noise, with no sound. And yet, London did not cripple, nor did even the Germans under our combined bombardment, including massive bombing of their cities. Terror does not work. The only reason the weaker party results or turns to terror is desperation. And it's an insight. What are they desperately afraid of? What they're afraid of is they're running out of time. In this point in history, there are more democracies than there have ever been in the history of the world. Fascist empires, communist empires, all kinds of autocratic empires have crashed into the dustbin of history. Those who would like to create a theocratic dictatorship know their time is running out. Every day that the word gets out via the internet, Twitter, Al Jazeera, whatever, their chance of perfecting the ruination of us and the creation of a 7th to 8th century Islamic theocracy diminishes. And that is why they turned to terror. What is our best defense against terror? I think the answer to that you saw right on 9/11 itself. And it came in the form of those men and women who were running into the buildings while others were running out. Those men and women who charged the cockpit on Flight 93. Americans have shown that a free people have a resilience and a depth that can never even be imagined by our enemies. During World War II, both the Japanese and the Germans, in their planning, felt we would be easy because they regarded us as a mongrel people. Unlike the Germans, one people, one Führer. Unlike the Japanese, one people, one emperor. We were a polygon of all the peoples of the world. Therefore, we couldn't have that strength of the unalloyed steel like they had. And we ground them into the dust. And democracy triumphed. Our strength lies in our diversity. Our strength lies in all of our various ancestries. There is an old Roman symbol, which for many years was on our coins, which we let go because of some of the associations during World War II. It's a bundle of rods around a single rod, called the fasces. It comes from Roman days. It represents the rights of the people of Rome. And the symbolism is that one rod can be broken, but a series of rods tied together can never be broken. They flex, they bend, but you cannot break them. And I always think of those things when I think of Todd Beamer talking to Valerie Johnson on the ground via the skyphone from Flight 93. A white young male talking to an older black woman. Strangers, but united in that one moment and instantly recognizing the bond between them as Americans and what was at stake. And I also remember a couple of other stories. Just share one or two more with you. Today I'm wearing this jacket because my former command in the military was one of the first units besides the anti-terrorism and counterterrorism force to arrive at Ground Zero. I was not there with them that day, but I interviewed and talked to my successor afterwards. They got there just after dark, and he set up his Jeep and he was on the radio. And all night long he was bothered by this crunching sensation and noise under his feet. And it was only in the morning that he realized that he was standing on human remains when the light came up. The torch has been passed to a new generation now. People like myself, we did everything we could beforehand, but we're out of the picture. And there are new people now, a new generation coming up that'll have to defend us and stand up for everything we value. I was at West Point almost 5 years after 9/11 on business, and as I was moving out of the cemetery, I almost tripped over a new grave, and the headstone wasn't up, just a marker, and I looked down, and it was immediately recognizable to me. It was a Lieutenant Emily Perez. She had been and you can count them off if you like, she had been the first minority, the first woman, the first African American, the first Hispanic surname to hold the high cadet rank of Command Sergeant Major. And she held it in what was called the 911 class, the class that came in that year and graduated in 2005. And she was killed in Iraq in 2006. And today is the anniversary of 9/11. Tomorrow is the anniversary of Emily Perez's death. We go on, but the images stay with us. We need to focus and never forget what was at stake and what remains at stake. And always, always dedicate ourselves, and rededicate ourselves again to the purpose that those sacrifices will not have been in vain. Thank you.